How's it going? And welcome to episode 206 of On the Wire, proud member of the Pitcher List Podcast Network. I am Adam Howe. You can follow me pretty much anywhere. You can figure it out by now. And Kevin Hasting joining me as always. Also, you probably know how to follow him at this point as well. If you don't, just heading to the PL Discord. That's the best way to find us. Go to pitcherlist.com/premium. Find out the best layer, best level to sign up for some kind of premium pitcher list level, whether it's PL Pro, and get all the fun bells and whistles, all the graphs that we're always referencing, and the live draft assistant, which is live right now. You can use for your final drafts of the season, or just PL Plus, where at least you get access to the Discord as well. But Kevin, we got a very exciting show. This is our first actual FAAB discussion. So those who didn't realize, yes, we have FAAB on Sunday on the NFBC platform. It still runs at the normal time. I think the standard Fantrax one runs like an hour later. I haven't played on Fantrax in a year or two, and they might have changed that by now. But make sure you know what time your FAAB does run, especially if it is a weekly one day a week thing. But Kevin, how you got everything ready to go, or are you going to do some scrambling at the last second like I tend to do?
Both.
Yeah, okay. Fair.
I think it's ready to go. So for those, drafting last weekend and this weekend, which is a very large percentage of drafts, hopefully you don't have to do too much, as we're about to talk in our news and notes. Unfortunately, we do have some holes we probably have to fill. But for those that drafted early, you probably have some automatic drops right now so that you're actually have a little easier time, because if you just drafted last weekend, you probably don't have anybody you want to drop yet.
Right.
But yeah, it's going to make it really intriguing, depending on when you drafted. Once again, hopefully you don't have to do much, if anything, this weekend. But the earlier you did draft, the more more time you're gonna have to put in this weekend.
Yeah. I mean, yes and no. I mean, yes, that's true. You got to put in more time, just to the fact that you've got maybe more holes to fill. But we're going to get into budgeting and stuff like that later on in the show. But I think something to think about is that you just have to fill a gap. You don't have to get the best player available. You don't have to spend all of your money. You make sure you have a ton of waterfall bids, just so you don't have a zero. You don't take the zero, and take advantage of now having a better sense of what the schedule looks like, all the games that are happening on that Thursday, the teams that have three. We're going to get into a lot of all this later on. But yeah, I think it's we talk about it throughout the offseason. It's like the pros and cons of drafting early versus drafting right up to it. I mean, if you don't have a draft until, Monday, you don't have to do this FAAB at all.
Right.
And it's interesting because then you can kind of see what, how much money you and the rest of your league mates saved by looking at the results from that as well. But you said it at the start. There's a lot of news to talk about. Unfortunately, it's going to make some adjustments for your FAAB bidding. So let's get into one that, because you've been talking about it, I've been drafting them in a handful of places as well. But I'm going to be without Thairo Estrada for at least, this is a very strange time frame, by the way, 4 to 8 weeks. That's a big gap. He's going to be out for at least 4, if not all the way up to 8 weeks with a broken wrist. I'm going to suggest with a broken wrist, I will err on the side of 8 weeks rather than 4, especially turning double plays at second base, hitting all the things you need your wrist for, of course. But besides the fact that, I mean, are you so in on Estrada that you're willing to stash him for that period of time, and then hopefully any power can come back, especially with an wrist injury? You're going to always be worried about that. And then on top of that, what are we expecting the Rockies to do if you can actually make any expectations of what the Rockies will actually do at second base?
Yes, Thairo Estrada, as you would probably expect, one of my most rostered players in the drafts I've completed so far. He's on half of my teams. Unfortunately, one of the reasons that I was so high on him this season, as we've talked about, is he was playing through injury in 2024. And now with coming back from a broken wrist, I'm not so sure, right? I'm not putting him in my lineup when he first comes back, whenever that may be, whether it's 4, 8, 10, or 12 weeks. It's gonna be a wait and see with it being a wrist injury. And if I'm not mistaken, it was a similar injury at one of the many that he dealt with last season. So unfortunately, he is a drop for me, probably almost everywhere. He in places he will be my last drop, but I'm probably going to have to do things that even if I don't drop him this weekend, I would drop him before he's back anyway.
Right.
And then adding on that wait and see when he does come back. Yeah, this hurts, but unfortunately, I think he's a drop. And then we're probably looking at Kyle Farmer for a little while. I'll probably look elsewhere. But in a pinch, if Kyle Farmer, we talked about the opening the season on the road for a couple of series. So road games for Colorado to start out, I'd be okay with, and then they will be in Colorado. So if I have to use Kyle Farmer, I can't find someone better. In the meantime, I'd be okay with him, even if it's just for the opening weekend, while I
Mhm.
do more digging of what I might want to do. But yeah, this one hurts.
Yeah, I mean, man, I'm having all these flashbacks. When wasn't Kyle Farmer like one of the very first signees of this offseason? And we're like, oh, he signed with
Yeah.
Colorado. That of all places he could have signed, this could
Before
end up,
Estrada,
yeah, this
we thought
could
he was
be
going to be the
interesting.
starter.
Yeah.
Yep.
And lo and behold, at least we've come full circle as far as the offseason goes. Obviously, the Rockies have a couple of other like prospects that they could, what we know we know what the Rockies do with their prospects, so I'm not too concerned about that. And there are some, options still on the wire that are just kind of been dragging their feet and seeing, the rumors I, read where, they could bring back Garrett Hampson. There's a couple other middle infielders that could at least come in as a extended spring training, get ramped up, and then see if they have more options. Very similarly to what I'm going to jump ahead here, Kevin, to what Atlanta
Mhm.
did with Alex Verdugo as they add some depth, and I use depth in quotation marks here, to the outfield. He will start the year in the minors, and he will get stretched out, as much as he needs to, and then obviously that will impact once he does make his way to Atlanta, that's going to impact playing time for somebody. The question is who and to what extent. And maybe it just impacts Verdugo. If you had any value on him, you're like, oh, this is the worst place he could have been. But Profar returned to the Atlanta lineup as well and should finish out spring training with Atlanta. So that looks like he should be ready for opening day as well. So that kind of flushes out the actual outfield for Atlanta. But what do you think? What kind of impact would Alex Verdugo have if and when he makes his way to Atlanta?
I feel like unless we see a huge adjustment from Jared Kelnick, that we're probably seeing the end of that experiment in Atlanta. The big question then becomes what happens when Ronald Acuna Jr. returns. Now we're looking at middle to end of May now at the minimum, we think, from what Atlanta has been telling us. But until then, I think we see Verdugo pretty quickly, unless Kelnick hits the ground running. I'm curious to hear your opinion on this, because this is something I've been thinking about over the past couple of days. Since when I saw the signing yesterday morning, I think it was, of Verdugo. My first thought was, "Ooh, is this the end of the Kelnick experiment?"
See, I thought that too originally, but then once I learned that he was going to be starting in the minors, which makes all the sense in the world, he's obviously just got signed and spring training's about to
Right.
end. Um, but and I find myself like even in my draft and hold my 50 rounders continuing continuously just passing over Kelnick every time he
Yeah.
comes. It's like, oh, I still need an outfielder, or I need a fifth outfielder. Oh, I need a first bench outfielder. I still find myself not trusting Kelnick to not only produce, but also to have the playing time to be given the opportunity to produce in Atlanta. So I don't know, it's tough. It's tough just because you want to play with the narrative, and you want to say, of course, this was a top one, top two prospect at one time or another. But you also got to remember, this is Atlanta is his third team in not that many years. Obviously drafted and traded by the Mets to Seattle, finally made his way up to Seattle through the minors, and then part of the trade or got sent over to Atlanta after that. But he's not very old. He hasn't been in the league very long to have played with that many teams, and that should always be kind of a red flag when prospects are traded or young guys are traded that often, or at least sent to other teams for various
Taylor
reasons.
Trammell.
Yeah.
It
Oh, that's
got
a
me off of
perfect.
him really quickly. Yeah.
Now you make that one trade, you're part, like the guys that are all part of like the Juan Soto trade, or the guys that we talk about. I'll
Of
go all
course.
the way back to like the Chris Sale trade to the Red Sox with that was Kopech and Moncada. It's like, you make that one trade. Obviously you got to trade somebody good. Like, you're gonna get traded for somebody like that. But when you're traded again, that second trade that's gonna be the flag for me. All right. Well, it's another minor leaguer who was traded, but you expect him to make some kind of production. Not going to be making any production today on Friday as we're recording this, as Kyle Manzardo was scratched from the Cleveland lineup, spring training lineup, with shoulder inflammation. So first and foremost, Kevin, like, how much stock were you putting into Manzardo actually producing in Cleveland this year, and how much does this news dampen that?
Well, I have a couple of early draft season shares of Manzardo. That very, very short window where we thought Kyle Manzardo was the starting first baseman for Cleveland before Carlos Santana was signed. It seems like hours, a few
Between
hours
Josh
later.
Naylor
Somehow,
after Josh
yeah,
Naylor was
somehow
traded.
I squeezed a share or two in there, and they may have had Carlos Santana on the roster by that time, but kind of thought they would, share first base slash DH, and then of course, the platoon issue for Manzardo could have come into play, and I think that's where we're leaning. um, I'm really curious to see where this goes. I have not been drafting Kyle Manzardo in recent drafts, so it wouldn't affect too much on the teams I already have him rostered. I'm gonna keep a close eye on this. Roster Resource still has him as large side platoon designated hitter for Cleveland. So this is a wait and see for me. But on the teams where I have already rostered him, I am prepared to have to make a move.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be, right. I mean,
Yep.
you just didn't know how Cleveland was going to handle Manzardo as it stood, just because you thought you was going to be up so
Right,
much
even
earlier.
pre-injury, we're
Yeah.
starting to wonder about the playing time.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, so we got some. Let's see some. Yeah, we'll jump around to some pitchers. Oh man. First and foremost, let's just get this long list of pitchers out of the way. That it just seems like we're at that time of year already where everybody is complaining about some kind of forearm strain, elbow discomfort, maybe some shoulders here or there. But of the list that I put together, Kevin, which ones are you the least concerned about? So the ones that I came across recently, Jared Jones, Drew Thorpe, both complaining about elbow. I don't know if they're complaining about him, but they both are reporting elbow discomfort of some sort. Ryan Weathers is going to start the IL with a forearm strain, and then Luis Garcia of the Astros, by the way, because I know there's like 17 Luis Garcias in the league. Also going to start. Look like he's going to start on the IL as well. Of those four guys, which one are you the least concerned about? if you're
Oh,
allowed to be.
least
Yes.
concerned. I'm concerned about all of them.
Sure.
I don't know if there is a least concerned, right? Because most of the guys you just mentioned are on the list of the hardest throwers in baseball, and
Mhm.
we know from the list from 2024, almost everybody, top 20. I think it was 17 out of 20 on the list, and Dave McDonald was posting last year's the other day, and then an update of this year of the guys that threw the hardest in 2024 coming into 2025. And I believe this was pre Jared Jones. It was already 5 of 21 people that were averaging over 96 miles per hour last season already headed to the IL. And I want to say that was pre Jared Jones. So we're already seeing a large number, and all these guys you mentioned are on that list. And so I'm worried, yeah, about any of them I'm already rostered. I'm planning on not getting them back anytime soon. And for drafts between now and opening day, they're probably off my list.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think of the three, I guess the one I'm the least concerned about is Drew Thorpe, just because I hadn't drafted him anywhere anyway. And so I'm not
Yeah,
concerned about it. Simple as that. The other
right.
three,
That's the only way I'm not concerned about these
exactly.
guys is
Yeah,
if
yeah,
I don't have them on my teams.
yeah.
Otherwise, I am concerned. Yes.
Another pitcher who's going to start the on the IL. Now I think it's either semi-official or it's basically official. Is Yu Darvish? He'll start the season on the IL. So there's a couple of options in San Diego to fill out the last couple spots in the rotation. Kevin, where's your gut feeling as far as and do you really care? Especially going into this for FAAB period, if you don't know a team's number 4 or number 5 starter at this point, unless it's a team that has 4 games in the first week of the season, is it worth fabbing those pitchers now or rolling the dice and seeing if they're still available on the next FAAB run?
No, I would be looking at them this week. And I'm glad you brought this up. It was going to come up at some point in this episode for certain. And that is fourth and fifth starters for most teams are getting a 2-start week, the first full week of the season, just the way the schedule works out. Most teams are playing 3 or 4 games opening weekend. That's getting us to the 4 or 5 on Monday. Now, with some off days, early in the season, we really have to look at each team's schedule closely because we might not see a fifth starter for some of these teams until the second or third week of the season. But there are some teams with full schedules right out of the gate. And so, fourth and fifth starters on the teams with the full schedules, depending on matchups, depending on their projected performances as well. And we'll get into this later in the show. We're at the point where we're talking FAAB pickups for the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
This is something I am taking into account. It's something I've heard Ryan Bloomfield talk about quite a bit over the past couple weeks as the season got closer. The way you've been talking about this is our 5th season now of you talking about the end of your drafts are once we're this close to the season is your opening
FAAB.
FAAB period. So
Sure.
these are guys I'd be taking the look at in the 29th, 30th round that yeah, this if I'm fabbing next weekend, I would pick this guy up for a 2-start. So just draft him this weekend.
Yes. Simple as that. Yeah, it's tough because we just spent an entire episode last week talking about the guys that we might fab in order to take advantage of the Thursday games or the 3-day
Mhm,
weekends. There's only so many roster spots that you can fab for, right? So it's like
mhm.
you got to know what's available obviously in your league, and if you can target the guy, if you can get more value at a lower price point for a guy that's going to give you stats the following week, and then not that you take the L, but you take a little bit of a a lowercase L on this weekend, then so be it. We're going to talk about budgeting a lot more later on as well, but that this goes into it, and it's kind of like what is it, the Popeye saying? Like, I'll gladly pay for, I'm glad you pay for you next week for a hot hamburger today. Oh man, I butchered that, but you're nodding your head. You've heard that before. All right.
Oh yeah.
And so you have to, look ahead, of course. And if it makes sense for you to do it now, if you have the spots, you're already covered for that added, those added at bats, those added innings pitched. Because we're going to talk, I'm going to mention it, and I'll mention it right now. It's like, I'm looking at relievers to go in this first weekend, because not all your starters are going to go. So if I can get some relievers to fill in those pitching slots for the opening weekend, just to get an extra 1-2 innings, maybe an extra 2 or 3 strikeouts out of each individual pitcher, just I have no problem dropping them, but then I'm going to have to pay a little bit more to get the fill in those the double tap guys, if they weren't already picked up by somebody else in the previous week.
And Frank in the chat was asking, which RP could have the best chance to vulture wins this season. You responded to look for thin rotations. I think typically we're streaming these guys, so there's a lot of luck involved to get the vultured wins. But opening weekend, right? You're going to have pitchers that typically you're throwing out there in your lineup, just like you're saying. And so opening weekend, I don't think usage will be a factor. If it's a guy that's going to be brought in a high enough leverage situation to vulture a win, he's not going to pitch the last couple of spring training games. He's going to be fresh and ready to go. So I think for this opening weekend, I want the 8th inning guys or high leverage guys that we talk about each and every week. The ones that have 4 games, then 3 games, and probably not even considering guys that don't play at least 3 games over the weekend.
Right. And luckily for us this year, or this weekend, everybody plays at least. Well,
everybody's got 3. Because we have Thursday involved and pitchers are locked in. So we get at least 3 from everybody.
No, I was looking at the schedule, and if I'm not mistaken, there's a couple, there are a couple teams that have either, was it Sunday or Friday? Maybe I was looking at the wrong weekend. We'll get to that later.
But they all play Thursday, I think.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yes. So they have 3 games.
And the pitchers will be locked. Our pitchers are locked for all 4 days. So unlike the hitters.
Fair enough.
So we get at least 3 from everybody, but I'm looking at the ones that have 4 games first.
Sure. All right. Got a couple other pieces of news to get to, but we got to take a quick break. All right, back to some hitting, Kevin. The Yankees, there was some talk that Austin Wells, who I think a lot of us already expected to be a possibility at the top of the lineup in the Yankees order, will see the majority of leadoff spots as against right-handed pitching. But the surprise that I read was that Paul Goldschmidt was going to be in line for some leadoff spots against left-handed pitching. Obviously, he's not going to get them all, but the fact that he's never really been ever a leadoff hitter in the past, he does have the on-base percentage and the OPS to be productive in that role. But what do you think, just knowing that those are going to be your top 2 guys in the Yankees order at the top of the order, do for their respective values?
I think, the first thing that comes to mind is Kyle Schwarber, right? We've seen this work. So the guys that have a much better on-base percentage compared to batting average at the top of the lineup, even if they have power. So it does knock their RBIs a little bit. Obviously, it won't hurt Goldschmidt as much as Wells, as he would be in the leadoff spot less often, approximately a third of the time if they do run with this philosophy for the entire season. So you got to figure a minor hit in RBI for Goldschmidt, but you get the correlating bump in runs scored. Right. So you just want to take that into consideration when you're penciling in what you think you're getting from these guys. And I've come around to Austin Wells a little more. One, it does appear he might approach or exceed the 500 plate appearances that we've talked about all offseason. I'm looking for out of my catchers. And 2, that he's a batting average risk, but we did see spurts from him last season. He was somebody early in draft season I was actively avoiding due to the risk of batting average, but I'm coming around a little bit, and especially if he's going to hit at the top of the lineup.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference too is where does Austin Wells bat in the lineup when he's not leading off? I assume he's the type of
He
player.
might not just swap with Goldschmidt
That's
to
what I'm.
the
That's
leadoff
expecting.
spot,
Yeah,
but he might be in like that 5 or 6 spot like he was last season, just slightly lower.
sure.
Yeah.
All right, and then another infield to consider is Minnesota. As I think we talked about this last week, Royce Lewis, he's going to be starting on the IL, but now also one of the possible benefactors of Royce Lewis missing time, Brooks Lee. He was held out of Thursday's game with back tightness. If he were to miss any more time and even possibly start on the IL to start the season, what are your overall thoughts on the Minnesota infield and how it's going to shake up with or without Brooks Lee?
If Brooks Lee does indeed miss time, I think we'd see a probably somehow they might not be the third baseman, but things would be shuffled around. I think we would see Austin Martin versus lefties, and Edward Julian versus righties somehow on that infield, and whatever shuffling they need to do. Probably not a whole lot of shuffling. Carlos Correa is the shortstop. Willie Castro can move around those, so you could put either of those guys at second base. But that's what I'd be looking at. Probably not a lot of interest in even NFBC formats where I can change my hitters out, because it's a couple of guys that we we used both Edward Julian and Austin Martin were guys we talked about on our FAAB shows in season in 2024. And there were times where we got value out of them, but neither one of them lit the world on fire. So it's not a platoon I'm targeting unless it's just a, a perfect matchup. In which case we'll be talking about them in another week or two if and when that comes up. But I, hopefully Brooks Lee is okay. But I don't think there's much here for me as far as drafts are going. I am going to look real quick just to see. I know we talked about it last week, but what's Minnesota? It appears that Minnesota will see. I'm just looking for opening weekend, like for the Thairo Estrada.
They're
They're
at
going to see
St.
all
Louis.
righties.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and they're going to see all righties with Friday off. So maybe Julian, if we do get word that Brooks Lee by Sunday might miss some time, maybe Edward Julian could be a viable replacement for Thairo Estrada or others. But it really has to be matchup dependent.
Yeah, I mean, he's not available anywhere, but this did, what piqued my interest here was Willie Castro being a little bit more available on a regular basis, with just more opportunity with all those positions that he's eligible at. If I had drafted him as my bench spot, I feel a little bit better about getting extra at bats out of him, especially opening weekend.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Willie Castro, it just fortifies that at 100%. I think we're going to see him every day or near every day anyway, even if he does move around. But it makes it if Brooks Lee misses time, it would make that a certainty.
Willie Castro is just the type of player that I could see him playing 9 positions in 9 days.
Yeah.
Simple as that. He plays all 7 days in a week. He might play all 7 positions, available to him as well. All right. Last thing here is going back to Atlanta. They add depth in a different direction, this time in the bullpen, bringing back an old face in the name of Craig Kimbrell. Of course, made a name for himself in Atlanta for a long time. And on a minor league deal, I should be, wary to say. Just the question is, we know what Kimbrell is at this point, and there's a reason he was only able to sign a minor league deal going into this season, even with all the experience and all the numbers he has. But with Iglesias being I believe, in the final year of his contract and being at his age, is there a road where Kimbrell can make his way not only back to Atlanta, but somehow find his way into the 9th inning for Atlanta come like the second half of the season?
I think it would take an Iglesias injury to see him back in the 9th inning on any sort of regular basis. However, we know he's been so up and down over the past at least couple of years, and even maybe less often prior to that, but still a really up and down guy. If he's performing well, if and when Iglesias would happen to have an injury, he's probably the ninth inning guy. Right? They have Pierce Johnson. We've wanted to see him in a ninth inning role, in San Diego and other places at times. Aaron Bummer, we have thought over the years could be a closer. It's never really happened. So I think this is a depth move. And even if he accepts the role uh, of the minor league assignment, just knowing that if something does happen to Iglesias, he's the ninth inning guy as long as things are going well at the
Right.
time. I think that's the path.
Yeah, I mean, in almost any other team, I would say absolutely not. But like
Exactly.
they lost AJ Minter, they lost the obvious guy, right? That would fill in
Exactly.
for Iglesias, and just by name recognition alone, Kimbrel's it just seems like it's kind of written in the stars. This is what's going to happen at some point in the season. You're like, I never saw this happening, but of course it did. Craig Kimbrel is now the Atlanta closer once again. All right. Well, I think that's enough news for today. A lot of action that could be taken, some action that you will have to be taking based on some of these injuries and some of the moves that the teams have been making. A lot of other news came across the desk. Rotations are being solidified, opening day starters are being announced. Well, actually, I did leave a piece of news out in here because we're going to get to it naturally when we get into our recommendations. So just know that there's a lot of other stuff happening across baseball that may or may not directly impact your FAAB. And so, we're always going to be missing some stuff. In order to make up for that, you should be listening to the First Pitch podcast, which has just started releasing daily episodes this past Monday, and we'll be doing it every single day throughout the course of the season. So if you're not subscribed to the Pitcher List fantasy baseball feed that has all the Pitcher List shows on it, you can at least go subscribe to the First Pitch podcast feed and get that show directly as well. Jake Crumpler, who was doing it over the weekend, is now doing it during the weekdays. And we have welcomed Trevor Huth back into our daily lives, taking care of our Fridays, Saturdays, and Sunday morning editions of the podcast. So you can listen to Trevor over at Coffee Talk as well, talking about rookies and prospects that are going to make a fantasy impact for your redraft leagues on a weekly basis. But now you also get 3 more instances of him on the weekends as well. So make sure you're listening to those guys. They do an amazing job. And Trevor made his debut this morning as well, doing the first pitch podcast of the season with his voice attached. So we got more to talk about. We're going to talk about, and we're going to get right into it. We're not ready for another break yet, Kevin. I'm going to just go right into it. The thing I wanted to talk about going into the season, and we talk about it a lot. I don't think we've ever really dedicated like a true conversation about it. It's always pieces of information that go back and forth, and it's about budgeting. Especially we all have the same budget going into this Sunday. We all have $1,000 in your standard, leagues, or some version of that. Yahoo leagues, I think it's like 100. So you just, do it by percentages there. And so, we talked about it at the start. Your budgeting for what you're spending on this opening weekend really depends on how many holes you have to fill and how early you drafted your teams. So we drafted one of our listener leagues back in January, another one in February. Granted, one of those was the 12-teamer, one of those is a 15-teamer. So that makes a difference in and of itself. But if you've got how much difference are you making in your budgeting especially for this opening weekend, based on what you have to fill in? What I started saying too is that I think, me personally, I will spend less overall money for my leagues that I have more holes to fill, just because I'm only interested in just making sure I fill the holes. And so maybe I do get lucky and I get, a guy I'm really targeting, and I spent a little bit more money than I expected on that guy. But overall, I expect my bids in those leagues to be lower, but I'm going to have more of them. I'm gonna have a lot more waterfall bids. There's gonna be a lot more options. There's gonna be a lot more players to bid on as well, mostly in those leagues. So I foresee myself spending less money in them and then spending more money on impactful individuals in my leagues that are just finishing up. Like my TGFBI draft just finished like 2 days ago. And so that's amazing in and of itself. But like I will expect that if I see a name on my wire that I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe anybody didn't draft him, or one of these injuries we just talked about opens up something that makes somebody way more valuable. I'm gonna be more likely to spend more money on an individual that is going to make more of an impact rather than just trying to fill a hole. What says you regarding that kind of like mentality?
I agree with all of that. And we talked about this a little bit a few weeks back. I brought up Vlad Sedler, who we all know. We all listen when Vlad is talking FAAB. Um, and he had come to the realization that on his weekly moves, when he's turning and burning, and he's typically talking 12-team leagues, but if you have the opportunity, with if you have players available in your 15-team league, you try to do this. It's just we don't have the player pool sometimes, but definitely in 12s of exactly what you're saying, spending less money when I there's more than a guy that probably has decent matchups for that roster spot on my team. Be fine with getting your third or fourth choice. Don't be bidding $20 to $30 on a guy you're only using for 1 or 2 weeks. If you get him for 6 or 7, great. If not, you use the guy, your third or fourth choice that you got for $2 or $3. I bought into that, and I believe I am going to throughout the 2025 season. I have always said that I typically operate on a weekly budget of dividing 800 of my 1,000 FAAB dollars into weekly. Typically gives me just under $40 a week, and then I can bump that because I won't need as much the last 3-4 weeks of the season, but I do want to be able to go more than $1 on players I want in September. But what this is going to do is I'm not going to be spending as much money weekly. So rather than having $200 when I want to make a jump, I might have 3 or 400 this season budgeted so I can get 2 or 3 of the larger price guys. One example being if he gets the job, Cam Smith is available in every league that was drafted before March.
Right.
And he could be it might be worth spending money right out the gate this weekend.
Yeah, I almost put Cam Smith as the example, like the power in the power category. But it really
Yeah.
depends on when you drafted because he's 100% rostered in all the drafts that have been happening in the last like week and a half, or 2 weeks even. So yeah, I mean, really depends on availability and all that. But if, especially in this opening weekend, it's not worth throwing out. Like we're gonna talk, might throw a name or two out in the wild card section, but like we always say, like, hey, if you have an extra spot, go ahead and bid on those prospects. If you're not sure they're gonna make a roster, you could throw the dice, and then you know what, they don't make the roster, you can throw them back in there. But what's nice is that now they are available to be picked up in the future before they get the actual call. It's not worth spending the triple digits on those guys if you're not sure. Like Cam Smith, by the time we have to play this bid, you're going to feel a lot stronger by the time Sunday rolls around, whether or not he makes that roster. Kristen Campbell is somebody I was going to bring up later on today. He hasn't been sent back down, but Von Grissom has. But technically, you don't know for sure that Campbell's going to make the roster. So David Hamilton is still kind of the favorite at second base or, in that position. So the less question marks that revolve around these players, if they are available, those are the ones that are worth, possibly doing triple digit bids on this opening weekend. It's, you know, I'm not saying it's hard to like go into the week 2 already being down to like $800 in FAAB compared to everybody else, because especially if you're in the right league, most of your league is going to be pretty aggressive, historically speaking, in that opening weekend as well. So you're not going to be behind the 8 ball as much as I think you might be afraid of, just because a lot of the other teams in your leagues probably are also spending aggressively, especially if there are those names out there. If Cam Smith is out there, you're not going to be the only one spending 150, $200 on that name. And if somebody else is willing to spend that kind of money, that means they're willing to spend it. Simple as that. So even if
Mhm.
you win it, they're probably also going to be spending that money on somebody else as well. This goes into playing defense as well, looking over the rosters in the final draft, of everybody else in your team who out there needs a second baseman or third baseman. Cam Smith is eligible at third base right now, but he could be playing second base, and gain that extra eligibility as well. So who needs that? Who needs that position eligibility? Who needs a hole to fill? And who is just interested in somebody like Cam Smith because they can be productive regardless? So yeah, just knowing what's going on in your league plays a big role into determining how much you're going to be bidding on players as well. And that goes into the keep your honest bids. Like how much are you even thinking about doing keep them honest bids in week 1?
Right. I won't.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
won't even consider it. I'm not worried about it at all. But you brought up a great point last week and just briefly alluded to it there. Uh, Remember, this first FAAB period, everybody is available, whether they were drafted or not, and whether they've had a single at bat in Major League Baseball or not. The 26-man rosters aren't set yet, so they can't say that somebody has to be on a 26-man roster, right?
Right.
So you can still draft any of these guys, uh, or pick them up in FAAB this Sunday, even if we still don't know their status yet, and make the move the following weekend to adjust if you need to.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, just man, the idea of going into this Sunday and having to spend money on players while still drafting other leagues at the same time is just
Yes.
it's not stressful. It's a little stressful. Cool. Well, just really the real takeaway too is knowing what else is going on in your league and knowing that every league is going to act a little bit differently. There's a lot of variables in play. And just know that you're never gonna get, especially in week 1, you're never gonna get the same bids on the same players across leagues. So we can sit here
Oh,
and
no.
yeah, we can sit here and be like, oh, you should be spending triple digits on X, Y, and Z, but you don't need to in certain leagues. Like you're going to see such a fluctuation of bids on different players if you look through the results pages of your format of your page of NFBC or what have you, the platform. Just based on the fact that like if you drafted a OC in December, and there were ones that completed in December versus an OC that finished a week ago, it can be wildly different uh responses to player availability. So um and take that with a grain of salt as well if you are looking at stuff after the fact. All right. Well, Kevin, let's get into actual guys that are available in various leagues, and if they are available, whether or not we think that they should be picked up to fill any kind of holes that we might have moving forward in all the different categories as we tend to do. And we'll get to that after this break. All right. We're still listening to On the Wire. I am Adam Howe, Kevin Hasting in here as well to go over category by category the player. And I just finished saying like it's going to be wildly different availability of these players based on when you drafted, but we do still have some rostership percentages to kind of lean on as far as like what could or could not be available in your leagues. And so we're going to go category by category as we tend to do: power, speed, ratios, volume, et cetera, et cetera. And we are, we're still going to be using main event and online championship roster percentages just to, give you some kind of barometer on what might or may not be available. But just know, even by the time you listen to this episode, a lot of these percentages might be wildly different. So as we get into it, Kevin, let's start off with the power categories. And yeah, I mean, who's out there who's readily available that can actually, take advantage of not only the added playing time of how many games they have for this opening weekend, but maybe they've made some adjustments and you're eyeballing them later on in the spring for added power that you might not have been eyeballing earlier on in the offseason.
Yeah, so the thing with these rostership percentages right now is they have as much to do with main events, 17 of them with the percentages I used, and there might have been another one or two completed and on the list by now as we're recording. I did this early, but there's drafts going on in Las Vegas as
Right
we
now.
speak.
Yeah.
So if any of them have ended, they would be added to the rostership. But all of the main event drafts have occurred over the last 2 weeks. So while I have Josh Bell, for example, doesn't surprise anybody that but we haven't talked about Josh Bell in a few weeks. So I had to get him back in
Here's
here,
two.
Adam.
Yeah.
And 100% rostered in main events. I love that, but it's due to people becoming more and more confident in his plate appearances as a designated hitter for Washington as we made our way through spring training. I don't think the gap from 100% in main events to 19% in online championships is completely due to 15 teams versus 12 teams. It has
Right.
to do with online championships being drafted earlier as well. So my point of this is, if you're in a 15 team FAAB league that is not an NFBC main event, I would still check availability on these guys. That was
Sure.
my whole point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Josh Bell, yeah, everybody knows my opinion on him, and it does look like he's locked in as that designated hitter in Washington. And then another guy that I have been talking about over the past couple of weeks because of an actual swing mechanics change that does appear to be paying off, at least versus spring training pitching. But I was interested in MJ Melendez anyway. As hard as he hits the ball, as hard as he works at bats when you're watching him play, I just really do feel like he can make these adjustments. And the fact that he is making a mechanical adjustment, 94% main events, 6% online championships. So main event drafters, I don't think this is
Right.
15s versus 12s. This is main event drafters are buying into the same thing I'm buying into with MJ Melendez. And I'd like to bring up a third guy that Frank asked about in the chat, Hunter Goodman as a C2 in Colorado. I think I would take that shot. You'll know right away if he's going to get the playing time or not. Roster Resource has him as a bench bat with Jordan Beck and Nolan Jones in the outfield. We know that neither one of those two guys worked out last year, and Hunter Goodman was getting playing time as a corner outfielder. I'm not so sure we don't see Hunter Goodman getting that playing time right away, but we'll know right away. I think he's worth a shot. So I would add him here we know his power as well. You brought him up at Power a few episodes
Mhm.
back for this exact reason.
Yeah, as the off season went on, I get a little bit more and more worried about his playing time. But I love
Right.
your point that he's a guy you're going to know. You're going to know right away how Colorado is going to use him. And if it ends up being positive, great. If he ends up being negative, he's one of your last picks in your draft, and you drop him. The other name that Frank brought in the chat a little bit earlier was Tyler Soderstrom, and the possibility of him gaining a catcher eligibility some point in the season. The A's have actually come out and said that he is still going to be in the mix for backup catcher duty for the Athletics. So I do believe that actually that will end up happening. I just don't know how long it'll take. As the backup catcher, that alone, even if he's getting partial backup catcher duty, he's not going to get it, in the first month. Like, he needs 10
Right.
games on most platforms. NFBC is the standard here. You need 10 games in season to gain that eligibility, 20 to keep it for next year. And so to get the 10, I don't expect Hersham to get that catcher eligibility until at the very least the end of April, if not sometime in May. But wilder things have happened. If he gains it, he's playing on a regular basis through the DH position as well. We could see some added value as a is one of those sneaky draft and hold catcher threes that you have to you don't draft as your catcher three, but he ends up becoming your catcher three at some point throughout the season. So more of a draft and hold thing, which is not what we're talking about, Kevin. So I'm going to continue on.
Well, Uncle Ted's got a good one here as well with the signing today. We didn't talk about in the news, so I'm going to bring it up. Gavin Sheets in San Diego. If the playing time's there, he's got power as well, but we got to see how they're going to fit him in the lineup.
Yeah, they also announced, San Diego did, that Jake Cronenworth will be playing all of his time at second base and not be playing first base this year. Where, though, it's nice that he has the eligibility for our fantasy purposes. Also nice for him to know that he only has to focus on one defensive position as well.
Exactly.
Which obviously opens up first base, obviously arises there as well. But for a power option, Sheets obviously has him beat on that. Well, let's move on to speed then. And I love that you threw David Hamilton on here, and I didn't have to. So David Hamilton, obviously,
I have questions though. I think I've
Of
asked
course
you
you do.
about David Hamilton every week.
I
Says I looked at this really close early this morning, and then a group text thread that I'm a part of, my keeper league in Abilene, Texas. People were the guy that's keeping Christian Campbell. That's
yeah
the way he's hoping, right? So I was really looking at tonight's lineup and last night's lineup. Very similar. Rafaela did not play last night, so they moved Duran over to center.
sure.
Campbell played left. David Hamilton was in there at second base. Looked like what could be an opening day lineup minus Rafaela. Today, Rafaela is back in. Of course, Duran's over to left, and Campbell's playing second, and Hamilton is not in the lineup today. This looks like what could be a starting opening day lineup. So, do I need to back off on my Hamilton love? Or do you think they'll move these guys around a little
And
bit? Maybe we see Campbell in the outfield some too, and Hamilton still gets his at-bats.
I was in the middle of 3 drafts at once throughout the course of the last 2 weeks, and I drafted Hamilton in 2 of them and Campbell in 1 of them. In that order, right? In that order.
Okay, I
And
like
so
that.
I think the fact that Campbell's still on this roster and Von Grissom is not, speaks it just speaks like to the fact that if that Campbell's on this roster, and if Campbell's on this roster, he's playing
He's playing.
close to every day. Simple as that.
And that makes
Uh,
Hamilton the utility guy. Does he get enough at bats as a utility guy?
Hamilton doesn't have the it doesn't seem like they're trying to give Hamilton the flexibility they're trying to give Kristen Campbell playing left field, as you mentioned. Hamilton's only playing the middle infield spots. He did
Mhm.
start a couple at shortstop, but playing most of the time at second base. Yeah, sure, he can be a middle infield utility, but he doesn't have enough flexibility to throw him pretty much everywhere. He still has, I don't think it takes away any of his value. We're talking about him in the speed category. That's what you want David Hamilton for. You're not getting him for any other reason. And he is definitely in that bucket of players that we talk about every single week, where he can add speed value even if he's not
Mhm.
in the starting lineup. And so if he starts 2 out of 4 in the first half of the week, he can still he'll probably get you that stolen base that you put him in the roster for on the days he didn't start. So you almost don't want him to start. And obviously that's not true. But so I don't think you need to pull off of the David Hamilton love, but I would not be drafting him as like your starting middle infielder. Like he at most he is your UT that comes in and out of your lineup based on if you need stolen bases in the next couple days. Or better yet, you're able to draft him as like your first or second bench spot, or bench hitter that you start the season on. And again, then you can use him as a team streamer in the right circumstances. The other guy that you put on here is the low hanging fruit.
The cheating one.
It's the cheating
Yeah.
one. I put 2 cheating ones later on in here, so I don't blame you for it. John Birdie being the suggestion. So the thing is with John Birdie, obviously you get the 2 stolen bases that he had in game 2. And so I was drafting, like I said, my TGFBI league just finished up. So I had the luxury of being able to pick my 30th round pick after game 2 had finished. Oh, no, sorry. While game 2 was in the middle. So I woke up on Tuesday morning, and the game was halfway through. Birdie had 1 stolen base at that time, and Enrique Hernandez had a home run. So I ended up drafting Enrique Hernandez for the home run. What I should have done is I should have waited just a little bit longer, and drafted Landon Knack, who I'll talk about as my cheating one, because he ended up with the win, even though Landon Knack has already been sent down to the minors and will not start with the Dodgers on U.S. opening day. But Birdie ended up with the second stolen base. That's nice to have, obviously. And Birdie will still have a job in Chicago when they come back for true opening day. And Chicago has the 4 games that they will start the season, Thursday and a 3-game weekend as well. Where Birdie, almost has the same amount of value as Knack is that, as soon as Nico Horner, and the rumor now is that Nico Horner might even be ready for U.S. opening day. Are you just fabbing Birdie for those 2 stolen bases? Or do you expect to actually hold on to Birdie past this opening weekend?
No, but
okay.
I am hope I 100% am drafting him. Looking at his ADP over just this week, since Monday, main events, he has been drafted in all 6 main events. So his rostership percentage, I would venture to say at 47% rostered in main events, that there have been 47% of main events occurred after the 2 stolen bases. I think there's a direct correlation there, right? And the question becomes, how much are these 2 stolen bases worth, right? My hope in my FAAB leagues is, right, and we had a Vesia save as well, right? So my hope is I have a player that I can drop where I don't need something specific back for him. So my waterfall will be John Birdie, Enrique Hernandez, Vesia, and who am I forgetting? Who got us the other? Knack for the win, right? I would venture to say the 1 win is the most valuable if I had to prioritize them. Of course, this can vary by team. If your team you think is light in stolen bases, Birdie goes to the top of that list. And I feel like, depending on which stats, therefore, which of these players I'm trying to land for just for the weekend, with the advantage that Birdie has and Enrique Hernandez both have, is they probably play that Thursday night. So we could get more out of them before we drop them on Sunday. You know what I mean? So I feel like this is where I want to use a little bit of that money I'm going to save throughout the season, because my top bid in my waterfalls is going to be lower, as we talked earlier. I could see spending, mid to high teens, depending on the need that you perceive your team is going to have throughout the season for these stats.
Yeah, I mean, because you're banking them, right? I mean, you're
100%.
not. It's not a chance. You're not rolling the dice. You know what you're getting.
Phil Dussault and many others probably have it broke down exactly how much those 2 stolen bases are worth, and that's their bid, right? But I'm not spending the time to do that. I think mid to upper teens is worth it if you think you'll need them throughout the season.
Yeah, sure. You'll spend more money on a pitcher who has 2 starts, and you are crossing your fingers he walks away with at least a win. Landon Knack,
Mhm.
you already know you got the win, and he had
Exactly.
good ratios in that, in those couple of innings that he threw out there as well. He's going to help you all around. I expect to see plenty of places where Landon Knack goes for triple digits just because of the value. I'm not saying I'm going to be spending triple digits on that particular stat, but I do expect to see it in where he's
I
available
was
in a couple places.
had this conversation with Mike Kurland this week. What is the win worth? I told him I couldn't remember exactly. I took Daniel Hudson in either the
Last
20th
year.
or 21st round last season. And he thought he did similar. So that's about I think, and my rationale on that, if I'm still drafting, is as soon as the latest you would get him is the 24th round. A lot of players like to draft their starting lineup, even though you don't have to before you start drafting reserves. Somebody's taking him in what they consider their reserve round.
Yeah.
So I bumped him a couple ahead of that. I think that's what we'll see with all four of these guys. That there's value in all four of them.
Yeah, it really depends on what your replacement level is at
Yep,
any point in your
100%.
draft. All right, well that's a plenty of non-speed talk in the speed category. We'll get into opportunity. We didn't even map out because we talked about it so much last week what the schedule looks
Right.
like. But just as a reminder, there are two teams that do not have a Thursday game. So your hitters, just know that you're going to have to fill in your Colorado and your Tampa Bay hitters on your first half of your NFBC work weeks. And there are a handful of teams, about half the league, have 3 games, and then the other half have 2 games over the weekend. Now, for pitchers, like you mentioned, it doesn't really matter, but for hitters, you're going to lose some at bats if you have a bunch of players on the teams that have just the 3. But nobody has 2, so that's nobody has 1 game. So nobody has Friday and Sunday off, which I guess is a good thing. But looking ahead, we've got a very minimal amount of teams that have a full 7-game work week for the following week. And as I scroll through here, the only team that I'm seeing, we got Cincinnati and Milwaukee have a 7-game work week. And that is it. Those are the only 2 teams that I'm seeing having a full work week. Philadelphia has a weird Tuesday off day, which is fun. Baltimore and Boston also have that weird Tuesday off day, along with Colorado. Colorado just can't catch a break early in the season, it seems, and they spend most of their time on the road to start the season. So with all that in mind, and anything else that you might have considered, Kevin, is there anybody you see finding themselves into added opportunity to either help with their batting average or just gain extra volume at the plate that might not have thought about while drafting?
Yeah, my original intent was just briefly mention a couple players here, and I know it was a long episode, and for people that are not hearing this until Sunday, and then doing our first FAAB this evening, going back and listening to a 2-hour episode may not be viable.
Fair.
However, uh, I am going to refer people that have time for that because it was almost exclusively hitting. We talked when we were talking about this opportunity category basically for 2 hours. But a guy we brought up earlier, Gavin Sheets, is available absolutely everywhere. And San Diego is set to face 3 righties over the weekend for Atlanta and miss Chris Sale for the weekend. I would not put Gavin Sheets in my lineup on that Thursday opening night versus Chris Sale, but I think he fits perfectly here for a guy that we did not bring up last week.
Yeah, love that. And yeah, if you do have the time, make sure you go back and at least, listen to the parts of the categories that you're the most interested in. Maybe you don't have to listen to the news and notes section because it's old news. Just listen to the second half. All right.
Right.
Well, we got some pitchers to consider as well. And that is going to line up perfectly with this next break. All right, Kevin, let's get into some pitchers. We got to spend our money on both sides of the ball in most scenarios. We already talked to death the Landon Knack situation. That was my low-hanging fruit. But the other name that came to mind for me that Nick Pollock just started talking about more on the Plus Pitch podcast, another daily podcast you should absolutely be listening to. All pitchers, all starting pitchers all the time, talking about everything they did the day before, everything Nick's looking for in the future as well for the next day in their matchups. But is Jordan Hicks is the name that just kind of popped up, where he had a pretty good outing on his last outing. If you look at his overalls, I mean, you can never look at true overall stat lines for spring training, especially for pitchers. So many things. We had Joe Ryan come out and say, I'm literally on purpose not throwing as hard as I can or should be. I think Jan Duran said the same thing, so maybe it's just a Minnesota thing. But we have just pitchers working on stuff, trying to do different things. Sure, they get hit around a little bit. They're not worried. I'm not worried. But Jordan Hicks comes to mind because he is slated to be the number 4, if not the number 5 starter, which would line him up for a nice little 2-spot week the following week. So he will be a starter for them. I don't expect him to be one of these sneaky plays. Like there's plenty of players that I don't think we even talk about, but like there are plenty of players in strange rotations that don't have anything set that you might end up seeing. Tampa Bay comes to mind, as you might see a Rasmussen steal a win, even though he's in the rotation. He might come in as a piggyback. Joe Boyle, same situation. You might actually get them in opening weekend, even though they might be the 4th or 5th starter, just because Tampa is going to do some weird stuff. I don't think that's going to be the case with Jordan Hicks. I think he'll just get the 2-step the following week. And this whole time I've been trying to stall because my website for the schedule is taking forever to pop up. But I believe, if he starts on, I think San Francisco they don't have the full 7 games. But they should have enough where he would get that 2-start start as well. But I don't know if you have that up, Kevin. I actually don't know who San Francisco's playing.
Oh, who they're playing. Oh, I
Yeah.
pull it up in 1 second. I do. Yes, I do know, though, there are no 5-game weeks. So
Yeah.
other than those 2 teams you mentioned earlier that play 7, everybody else does play 6. So as long as they're the first pitcher of the week, and not on one of the handful of teams trying to go 6-man rotation, yes, we should be able to count on the 2 starts,
Yeah.
the first full week of the season.
Finally loaded up. There will be at home against Houston, and then they'll be at Houston, and then they will be hosting Seattle to end the week. So if he does start that Monday, he'll get a Houston Seattle double tap, which I would have liked it better if it was the other way around. I wish they were hosting Houston and then pitching in Seattle, but I'll take it at this point, especially early on in the season.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing, Uncle Ted has brought this up many times throughout the offseason. Early in season, pitching should be ahead of hitting. So I'm not as worried about some of the powerful, potent lineups as I will be in a few weeks.
Yep. Especially if you look at where they're playing their games. Anybody playing north of the central part of the country, you're still going to be hitting a lot of 40, 50, 60-degree games. Sure, maybe games in Houston or in Tampa, actual Tampa, are going to be a little warmer and worse for wear. But most of these games are going to be happening in a colder environment. The ball's not going to travel as much. Cool. And also, that affects pitchers as well. But the pitchers, if they're just going constantly, the longer they have to sit on the bench in between innings, that plays a bigger role too as well. But if the pitchers are going consistently, even in cold weather, you can find them being a little bit more productive and a little bit more consistent than the hitters are in colder weather. All right. Well, Kevin, and then Lane and Neck, we know that you're banking that win, and that's all you're going to get, and you're going to be dropping them. So a bid accordingly there. Any other names that fit the wins and strikeout category for you, Kevin, in this first opening FAAB weekend?
Yeah, a couple of them, and this one became pretty apparent. He's heavily rostered, and it's because we know Dustin May is now in the rotation. We still do not know what the Dodgers will do opening weekend. I did see an MLB graphic listing it as Yamamoto facing Skubal on opening night, but when you go to the schedule where on MLB where it's typically officially been announced, they still have TBD for the Dodgers, the only team that we don't know who is starting opening night. Jason, over at Roster Resource, he's got them going right to the 3-4-5. So we see Dustin May versus Detroit on opening weekend. If not, um, if they start over, that moves him back 2 spots, and they only have 6 games the following week. So he would not automatically fall into a 2-start week the first week if Yamamoto and Sasaki both start opening weekend. It wouldn't be till the second full week that we would end up seeing that 2-start from Dustin May. So we don't have that cushion that we do with a lot of 4 and 5s for automatically knowing. But we're not picking up Dustin May just for this weekend, right?
Sure.
We're planning on keeping Dustin May if you do land him in FAAB this weekend. He is rostered in 77% of 12s even, and the 23% would have been those that were drafted early. He's not
Of
going to be
course.
available unless you drafted early, but I would look at him. And then a guy that's going to be much more widely available, and with the matchup, it blows up sometimes. But with it this time of year, pitching being ahead of hitting, and he's typically pretty darn good in the spots we like him for matchups. I'll throw Martin Perez out there opening weekend, hoping to get a win.
Yeah. Well, yeah. The hoping part is the big part. I mean, the innings will be there. I'm not concerned about the innings,
Yeah.
so he'll put himself in a position. And I think we'll probably
We're not counting on many wins from any White Sox pitchers,
exactly.
but they're facing the Angels, and yeah, I like the Angels lineup, especially while they're healthy and have a healthy Mike Trout. But
Mhm.
it's not like we're scared of the Angels. So Martin Perez, if you're in a bind in deeper leagues and need somebody, if you
And then
lost some of these guys that have been dropping like flies, it seems.
White Sox also announced that they're going to be going with a 4-man rotation for the first couple weeks of the season as
Yeah.
well. So, he's going to get his, Martin, you may not be dropping him after the first week just because you're going to get those innings out of him for the first, couple weeks of the season as well. He's not going to get an extra day of rest. All right, cool. Well, let's get into ratios, which this category is almost impossible to talk about at this point in the season. As you mentioned, Kevin, it's like the repeating of the all-star reliever is so unpredictable in most cases. It is like throwing a dart, but what you can, and this came up in the chat earlier on as well. As you brought up, it's like what kind of reliever can you actually target? The question was more revolving around wins, vulturing wins,
Mhm.
but in general, like we're looking at also volume of good relievers because a good reliever who can help your ratios, if they get in the game more games more often, can make more of an impact on those ratios as well. So I look at generally speaking, I look for rotations that are in flux and that are going to be filled with number 4, number 5 starters that you just don't trust. And if you don't trust them, then the team probably doesn't either, and they're not going for more than 4 innings, giving more innings available to the bullpen as a whole. Tampa, I mentioned earlier, is one of my biggest targets in that area as well. So you have Uceta as the the kind of the big name who's not the actual closer, probably at least not to start the season. And then as much as he might not help your ratios all the time, Joey Wentz is somebody in Pittsburgh that you might just be looking for volume. Look, maybe you don't pick him up for this first FAAB period to kind of see how he's used and how he's doing in the regular season. But you could see more innings out of a guy like that in a long relief role on a roster that went through some things at the end of spring training. We just talked about Jared Jones not making, going to be starting the season on the IL and then probably out for a lot longer than that as well. But the name that I'm actually targeting or thinking about targeting in certain situations is Gregory Santos in Seattle. And so just the fact that This is somebody who I do trust the ratios. He was in spring training earlier than most other pitchers working on things. His spring training line, like a lot of pitchers, is nothing to look at, that, nothing shiny to look at. But he is not even the next in line for the closer situation. But I do expect them to use him in the right circumstances and for him to be successful. Not to mention that Seattle plays in very favorable conditions to start the season as well. The matchup over the weekend, as this thing loads a lot faster for me, maybe. They play at home for their first 2 series, 4 games against the Athletics, and then 3 games to start the following week against Detroit. And then they go into San Francisco. So 3 very favorable pitching matchups in general for any pitcher, and then they come back home and face Houston. So that matchup not as good, but they're still at home at least. And we know how the Seattle ballpark can play up strikeouts and play up pitchers in general as well. So Gregory Santos, easy $1 bid, especially if you are like me and you have an earlier draft you made where you're like, I just need to not take a 0. Plus the 4 games for opening week is not something if I can't get a decent Cub reliever who can give me the 6 games, then it's who produced over the Tokyo series. I might be looking at Seattle as well. Any other names out there?
I love that pick. I do want to bring up, so this is different for me this weekend. Kind of mentioned it earlier than it will be every other weekend throughout the season, because we don't have to bring recent usage into play. And you're the one that talks about that the most in season. I'm really going to try, since we don't know that usage when we record a night or 2 prior to FAAB running, I'm going to try to post on Blue Sky at least a handful of names that weren't used Saturday and Sunday. Of course, by the time Sunday's game's over, we're getting pretty close to FAAB lock. But I'm going to try to get a few names out there each week, because we'll say if he's not used, well, all season long, if he doesn't pitch Saturday or Sunday, we'll try to get that information out there for people. For this weekend, and I look at this list often in season as well, because these types of guys, there's so many of them, and it's hard to keep track of. And looking at stat sheets doesn't tell you necessarily when in a game a guy was used. Right. So I love Rick Graham's save plus holds rankings on pitcherlist.com. Imagine that. Surprise. And especially for a weekend like this where I'm not worried about usage and I just go down the list. Griffin Jax is top 10, right? He mixed right in there with the closers. He gets drafted in many leagues as a spec closer, but he might be available. Same with AJ Puck, right? And then I just go down the list. Cade Smith, one of the best for this category, probably the best for this category as a season-long stat for last season, and just go down Rick's list. Jeremiah Estrada, love that one. San Diego has 4 games too. Jeremiah Estrada might be my top pick. Orion Kirkering, drafted in many places. Jason Adams, some that were speculating the Robert Suarez trade that doesn't appear to be happening. Luke Weaver, right? I'm just going down this list, and I'm not bidding over $1 for any of them.
Exactly. It's the dollar bid train. And you'd be happy with whatever you get, especially if their volume can possibly be there, because you don't know what to expect in this opening weekend. As you mentioned, you don't know the usage yet. All right. Well, a lot of ratio options out there. And again, I can't stress enough, just don't take a 0 on this first weekend. Get somebody. But then let's close it out with saves. I mentioned that the Chicago White Sox going to go with the 4-man rotation. They also said multiple pitchers would be used in the final innings for as many saves as possibly the White Sox could be given opportunity. But at the top of the list looks like it'll be Mike Clevinger. Are you putting any stock into that, Kevin? Are you spending any money on Mike Clevinger where he's available?
Only if I'm really desperate.
Yeah, right.
But I do think he probably is their guy, at least to start, and could keep the job. So if I'm desperate, I think I think the White Sox do win more games than they did last year. By no means do I think they're going to be a good team, but I think if he performs early, he keeps the job. And if the White Sox are just a little better than last year, then we know even when they win, it's a close game, right? The old philosophy that you can get saves from a bad team because when they win, it's never going to be by over 3 runs.
Yeah.
So I like that a lot. Well, a lot is
Yeah,
the
sure.
wrong word,
Yeah.
but more than I would have thought I would have
There we
liked
go.
him. I guess others, especially if you drafted early. I pulled up our 15-team listener league that we drafted a couple of months ago, so just to see who might be available, right? Because we've seen closer news. Yeah, Ryan Presley is at the top of the list, right? He's
Right.
available if you drafted early in some spots. You've brought up Chris Martin a few times throughout the season, throughout the off season. It looking more and more like maybe he does start the year with that job for Texas. One other, Bo Brisky, I've been picking up late. I know AJ Hinch has said it's not going to be one guy. I feel like Bo Brisky could get more than an even split share. I think he might be first choice in many circumstances. So I think there's several available if you're looking for closers for the opening weekend, and maybe even hopefully to get you a few saves over the first few weeks of the season, if not longer.
Yeah, the other name that was thrown around in Texas that caught my eye was Mark Church,
Yeah,
who's just been looking incredibly nasty. And they're talking, Jake and Rick were talking about him too on the Independent podcast. And so make sure you're listening to that for all reliever news. Imagine that talking
Sir
about,
Anthony
yeah,
Dominguez might. It
yep,
looks like he
yep.
might get another opportunity that we've seen in the past. Yeah, there's names out there if you need saves.
The one that
And
bothers
they
me the
won't be
most.
for long, though. They're all
No,
gonna
yes.
get grabbed right
Yeah, yeah.
away.
The one that bothers me the most is that a couple days or maybe even over a week ago, Alex Cora came out and said he wants one guy to close in Boston. He learned his lesson a couple years ago about having the stability and how positive that can be. And now, most recently, it comes out. Liam Hendriks came out and basically said, Aroldis Chapman deserves the job based on performance in spring training because Liam Hendriks has not been hitting his spots, which is disappointing to me because I have not drafted Chapman anywhere and I have a whole bunch of exposure to Liam Hendriks. We'll see how that turns out when the season actually rolls around. I'm still confident that Boston wants Liam Hendriks to be the closer for the Red Sox. It might just take a while for him to earn that spot back in the role. So we'll see how opening day actually heads out there. Both of those guys have been drafted in pretty much every draft throughout the course of the offseason as well. So they're more than likely not available. If anything, Hendricks might be available, and maybe that's worth a spec ad in your leagues. And then of course Alex Vesia got the save in Game 2 of the World Series. So whatever that's worth to you, you should be bidding on that. And then but then Alex Vesia just turns into a guy that you'd be specking on for ratio help.
Right.
I don't.
Vesia's a
Yeah.
right. The category we just finished talking about. You might hold on to him for a week. You might not. You're not going to feel bad if you need the spot and need to let him go. But just the weekend, he may add to his value. You might get more than that one save. He could vulture a win. I would count on a couple of strikeouts and good ratio help, like we just talked about. Yeah,
Exactly.
great point.
All right, Kevin. I already talked enough about Christian Campbell. He's my wild card pick here, so I'm gonna turn the mic over to you. Any other Robert Hassel III, who I talked about last week as a possible wild card, did get demoted. He will not start on opening day for the Nationals. So any besides Cam Smith, you can't talk about him. We talked about him enough as well. What other wild card is out there that you can spend some FAAB on?
Well, I was going to bring up Cam Smith, but I'm probably not looking unless it's still a guy that I think is going to break camp, Christian Campbell. You got a couple other Red Sox. I think we see Roman Anthony soon. But how soon? We don't know. I think we see him soon. I think I'm probably not stashing anybody to start this season that isn't on the active major league roster. I'll start keeping my eyes out as guys start to perform, just because if they're not going to make the roster, most teams I think do care about the perception, and even if it is 100% only due to time manipulation, I don't think they bring them up as soon as they can on the day, like that we saw with Chris Bryant and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. I don't think we see that. I think it would be further into April. And then what if they don't hit the ground running at AAA, and so it gets delayed? This time of year, I'm not specking yet. Also, because when I'm drafting, and even if I have players to drop, if it was an early draft and I already have guys I'm cutting bait on, uh, this time of year, I'm I, I want my coverage. I want my coverage for my hitters. So hopefully a couple of multi-positional eligible players, or I have my corner is available at outfield or middle as well. I hopefully get my coverage with just 2 or 3 players, because I'm going pitching, because we have so many, and this Nick Pollock brings this up every season. We have so many guys being drafted very late or not at all that will end up being season-long values, and the only way to get them is to have them before they're show us how good they are. So taking shots on starting pitchers is where I'm at. And so I'd be looking at like early drafts. We didn't know Kumar Rocker had a job, right? Or Jack Leiter for that matter, and they're probably both in Texas's rotation right now. Max Meyer in Miami. I think I'm taking my wild cards on starting pitchers that we already know are in the rotation, but weren't drafted because we didn't know at the time.
Yeah, fair enough. Sorry, I'm also chuckling over at Frank in the chat, who's asking me to make him a drink. Those who watch me on a regular
Yes.
basis know this is not my normal backdrop. I finally got to cut. It only took me, 5 years of doing this podcast and 40 plus years of being alive. I could finally check off. I recorded a podcast in my parents' basement off my, lifetime bucket list. So luckily for me, I guess they have a bar built into their basement, so that's nice. Cool. Well, Kevin, with all those recommendations, and there's a whole bunch more out there, to be honest, just because it is opening weekend and your leagues are going to fluctuate availability. So, as always, my thing I will lead you with, and I will say this multiple times throughout the course of the year, just check. Just check your availability. You mentioned it, like going into our 15-teamer, which we drafted back in January. Ryan Presley's still out there. Like, there are guys that are drafted 100. If you go look at the main event rostership, you're going to see 100% rostered, but they're still going to be available in your drafts. That if you drafted it back in January or even February, is never mind back in October and December and what have you. Anything else, Kevin, though, that you can leave us with as far as just to squash the stress? Any mental notes that we can make leading into the first FAAB period?
Something I haven't said in a while that I will say a lot this season as well, but it's been a little while. All the little things add up to a big thing, and now this counts. Even though we are, as we're recording, we're 6 days away from opening day, but we are 2 days away from what we have to do if we're going to put in the time and maintain our leagues and try to make them as efficient and as good as they can be. Just drafting, we're not done unless it was a gladiator or other form of a best ball league, right? So all the little things do in fact add up to a big thing. If you've ever taken Jenny Butler's advice and kept a notebook, go through the entire thing. Go through and check everything you've been jotting down from the middle of last season, and make sure there's not some little nugget that you wanted to remember this year that you've already forgotten about, but you wrote it down. A couple of big things. I've already been looking at the Dodgers and Cubs. I looked at their bat speed. Kyle Bland told us it only takes a series. Now, I was disappointed Mookie Betts got home. He's the one I've wanted to see
Yeah,
that the
yeah.
most of, as we talked about a few weeks ago. But also on Savant, if you go to the actual player page and then hit the bat tracking portion of the different stats, it does have 2023 bat speed. We didn't have that last year. They've added that. So you can compare year over year 23 to 24 on bat speed if you would like. That's something I've noticed. When you go to individual player pages, there's not a leaderboard for it, however. So just, yeah, all the little things add up to a big thing. And of course, have fun, enjoy it. We are 6 days away from the actual opening day.
Beautiful. Yes, cannot wait. And yeah, last thing I'll say, echo exactly that. Have fun. That's what it's
Yeah.
supposed to be all about. With all of that and everything else, that's going to do it for episode 206, the first FAAB of 2025 of On the Wire. Join us every single week. We'll be recording most times on Friday evenings live here on the Tube of Views. And then we'll be putting out that episode audio version of it on the podcast stream every Sunday morning. So look for that as well throughout the course of the season. On behalf of Kevin Hasting, I am Adam Howe. Thanks for listening, and we bid you goodbye.